Today's broadcast is brought to you by viewers like you. Become a member today and unlock exclusive content at patreon.com/NorthstarRadio.
Welcome to Morning Joe. So glad to have you with us this morning, along with Mika Brzezinski and Willie Geist. Mika, I know
what
the only story we're going to talk about today,
Yeah.
the Boston Red Sox. We'll get to that in a little bit. Oh, yeah, and by the way, Turkey's invading Iraq.
That's happening too.
Live from the front lines, what is Saddam thinking?
Good evening once again. Today, another apparent Saddam sighting, this time with a twist. He appeared with his two sons, but was it really Saddam or was it an imposter? And when was the tape made? Is it all part of a strategy to keep the regime alive? Also, a lot of the atrocities anticipated at the outset of this war have mostly failed to materialize, at least so far. Does that mean Saddam Hussein is not in control?
The most trusted name in news.
Do you think New York State should recognize gay marriage?
No.
No. Okay.
Now for a story that made us say, seriously? The Occupy Wall Street protest entered its third week today. What started as less than a dozen college students camping out in a park near the New York Stock Exchange is now hundreds of protesters, and it's spread to other cities. But what are they protesting? Nobody seems to know.
Oh boy. So my feeling has always been, and you probably know this about me, you've probably seen the program.
I watched the show, yes.
You watched the show a couple times. Is that I believe that you helped the administration take us to like the most devastating mistake in foreign policy that we've made in like 100 years. But you seem lovely.
What the f is wrong with this dude? Didn't he go to war and like literally lose his eye because some mujahideen, a brave fucking soldier, his eye hole with their dick?
This is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
This is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
Protect Bernie Sanders!
This is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
Protect Ilhan Omar!
This is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
The hogs!
This is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
This is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
This is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
This is extremely dangerous.
This is extremely dangerous.
Wait, no. Then I remembered that my full-time job is to do journalism.
In 14th century England, in an era plagued by the Black Death and Great Famine, a new word was gaining prominence, a special word used to describe fresh information making its way to the public for the very first time: news. For the longest time, news was distributed in the form of newspaper, thanks to the printing press. Soon the invention of motion pictures allowed for newsreels to be shown in theaters, initially as a silent film. Then radio was popularized and became the #1 way breaking news was distributed amongst the public. But then, on an inconspicuous spring day in 1940, NBC decided to simulcast their nightly radio newscast with a new experimental type of media: television. While at first the television airing of Lowell Thomas's newscast was only seen by a fraction of America in New York City, the television news broadcast soon became a staple of the American media environment.
Stand by for the opening night of the National Television Service. Hello there, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and children. This emblem that you've just seen is tonight the symbol of a historic occasion, the opening of the National Television Service.
From the studios of TV8, Ray Wilson and Bob Regan present the award-winning TV8 Newsreel. Mel Knepp brings you another special report. Lyle Bond reports on the world of sports. Doug Oliver presents the weather word. Harold Keane interviews people in the news, and Bob Dale reports the lighter side. I'll be back with these other special features on the CBS Evening News.
This portion of the news is brought to you by Safeco Insurance, your finest, most complete roof of plan protection.
Good evening. These are the world headlines at this hour. Right, China says it's ready to undertake maximum national sacrifices to support North Vietnam in fighting the United States. But the broadcast from Peking does not say what form these sacrifices might take.
If you grew up in the United States between 1990 and 2010, chances are, no matter your economic status, you found a place for a television in your budget. In the year 2000, 97% of American households had a television. In 2013, 71% of adults watched local news, and 65% watched network newscasts. Within those news networks, there was a clear political divide. If your family often had the news playing on the TV, you were one of two things. You were either a CNN family or a Fox News family. Each side saw their source of news as the one true source, while the other was a sad, pathetic joke of journalism. We saw this play out during the Trump era, with his popularization of the term fake news, which further separated the left-right divide in the television news space.
Don't be rude.
You're attacking us. Can you give us a question?
Don't be rude.
Can you give us a question?
I'm not going to give you a question.
Can you stay categorically?
You are fake news.
John Roberts, go ahead, John. No. John Roberts, go ahead. CNN's fake news. I don't take questions. I don't take questions from CNN. CNN is fake news. I don't take questions from CNN. John Roberts of Fox.
CNN and MSNBC saw their ratings increase drastically as they ripped on the evil yet goofy presidential candidate and soon president of the United States. Fox News saw the same increase in ratings as they pandered to Trump supporters and Trump himself, glazing him and telling him how strong and intelligent he is. This was a much-needed peak in the clearly already dying industry of network television. But with the Trump era fading away, with a grand finale failed insurrection, traditionally left-wing media seems to be inching more and more to the right. Almost as if the framing of the Trump presidency was the only thing separating left-wing media from right-wing. Is left-wing media officially dead? When I was in high school, in my freshman year civics class, we were shown this chart. This is the media bias chart by Advances Media. It's meant to graph and understand the political bias of over 300 media outlets, using two axes of political leaning and news value and reliability. At first glance, the graph seemingly makes sense. Media outlets at the far ends of the spectrum are more biased and less credible than the media outlets that have less political bias. However, when taking a closer look at this graph, it starts to make less and less sense. Take Democracy Now! And CNN, for example. According to the Advances Media bias chart, CNN has less of a bias than Democracy Now! And is thus charted as being more reliable in their coverage. If we look at the ongoing student encampments at American universities who are protesting for the end of Israel's siege on Gaza, as well as the university's investment in said occupation, we see a clear difference between these two media outlets' coverage. Democracy Now! Is based in New York City and is hosted by Amy Goodman. When the Columbia protests began to escalate after the NYPD decided to enter campus and forcefully arrest peaceful protesters, Amy Goodman was on the scene interviewing students of Columbia participating in the protest and being actively arrested.
Last night I got a text as the protest was heating up. I was walking my dog Zazu. We raced over to the news school and I met up with Democracy Now! Fellow Hannah Ilias. And we started reporting and recording. We're standing in front of the police van where they put a young black man who they arrested. Then scores of people came, professors and students, to demand that he be let go. They sat in front of the police van, and now scores of police have come to arrest the people that are sitting in front of the van.
My name is Crisa Pugh, and I'm assistant professor of sociology here at the New School. And I'm sitting here because as I was walking to support our students in the encampment, the faculty encampment, they arrested one of my black students, refused to tell me why they were arresting him, and promptly threw him in this van. And I am not going to stand up and let this van go until I let my black student out of that van. and he was arrested for supporting Palestinian Gazans. 40,000 have died, and you're arresting this kid?
While on CNN, Anderson Cooper interviewed not a Columbia student protester or even a Palestinian for that matter, he interviewed Jonathan Greenblatt, the CEO of the Anti-Defamation League, where he accused these protesters of endangering Jewish students, and even described students wearing keffiyehs as dressing like ISIS fighters.
Turning to our breaking news, arrests at college campuses across the country during student pro-Palestinian demonstrations. Just moments ago, the University of Florida in Gainesville said it arrested 9 demonstrators. Columbia University began suspending students earlier today after some had defied a deadline to leave. We're joined by Jonathan Greenblatt, the CEO and National Director of the Anti-Defamation League. You've gone to Columbia, you've gone to a lot of campuses across the country. What did you see? What are you hearing?
I mean, the scenes are quite amazing. It's almost kind of sad. So you really have a very small number of protesters. I mean, take Columbia. Columbia has nearly 30,000 students. We're talking about a couple hundred people. At UCLA, I was at UCLA yesterday. They there have, 48,000 students. And again, we're talking about a couple hundred. So less than 1%.
And how many of them are actually students?
A lot of them are not students. They conceal their faces entirely. So you can't even tell who's an outside agitator and who's an actual student. But it's sad the way that, all the kids deserve to be able to study. All the kids deserve a commencement. All the kids deserve a graduation. And a small minority are disrupting the opportunity for everyone and just violating the rules.
What would you like to see universities doing that they are not currently?
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of bizarre the way the presidents are stumbling, I think, but there's some simple things to do. Number one, they do need to institute law and order, like President Summers said earlier, not with excessive force, but you need to make sure that these students understand they got to play by the rules. So number one, you need to make sure all the students are safe. I've talked to enough Jewish students to know they feel intimidated and menaced, and there haven't been consequences. So that's number two. If you violate the rules, the administration shouldn't make concessions to you, as we saw happen at Columbia and Northwestern. There needs to be consequences. Again, if you violate the rules, you should be suspended like anyone else. And then number three, no full face masking. I mean, again, I just don't think it's appropriate, and it doesn't impinge upon your freedom of speech. That you shouldn't dress up like an ISIS fighter.
The Association of College and Research Librarians published an article calling out the Adfanches media bias chart, where they accused the chart of promoting a false equivalency between left and right, lionizing a political center as being without bias, and reinforcing harmful perceptions about what constitutes news in our media ecosystem. They claim that a bipartisan analysis, what the Adfanches bias chart is doing, is not a true analysis of media and cannot be seen as quote-unquote good. When Donald Trump claimed that there were very fine people on both sides of the Charlottesville riots, we can easily identify what a facile, deceptive framing this is. So why do we allow it within our media analysis? Just taking a look at the extremes, you can see a clear miscategorization. Rev Left Radio, a podcast that quite literally just discusses past and present history of revolution around the world, is charted at nearly just as unreliable as the Alex Jones Show.
Hitler took the guns. Stalin took the guns. Mao took the guns. Fidel Castro took the guns. Hugo Chavez took the guns. And I'm here to tell you, 1776 will commence again if you try to take our firearms. Doesn't matter how many lemmings you get out there on the street begging for them to have their guns taken. We will not relinquish them. Do you understand? That's why you're going to fail, and the establishment knows no matter how much propaganda, the Republic will rise again when you attempt to take our guns.
If you look a bit higher in the chart, at the opinion or wide variation in reliability section, we see MSNBC, a categorization that I honestly agree with. My family was neither a CNN family nor a Fox News family, but rather, my family was an MSNBC family. Whether I was just waking up and coming down to the living room first thing in the morning, or getting home from ultimate practice and settling in the living room, chances are MSNBC was playing on the TV. This channel featured progressive talking heads, the likes of Rachel Maddow, Chris Hayes, Joy Reid, Lawrence O'Donnell, people who celebrated the progressive movements of 21st century America and pushed for the continuation of democracy in our ever more fascist state under the Trump administration.
As we watch the disturbing imagery emerge from campuses at Columbia, UCLA, University of Texas, University of South Florida, so many others, where cops, or in some cases mobs, took down pro-Palestinian student encampments and protests, as well as professors and journalists and just random bystanders.
But then you have Morning Joe.
I'd like to think that what the students feel about the university is important enough that maybe we could bring this university to a halt and really reorder its priorities. But at the moment, it doesn't seem that this is possible at all. We may halt classes for a few days. We may even halt it for a spring. But ultimately, we don't change the foundation of this university, which is essentially an enormous business corporation.
That was a Columbia University student speaking to NBC News in 1968 about ongoing protests at the school in opposition to the Vietnam War.
I've got to say, it makes as much sense in 2024 having 18 or 19-year-old people running college campuses as it did in 1968. Which is to say, doesn't make any sense at all. And you do wonder where the adults are. The adults that are supposed to be running the university, the amount of money that they are paid to educate students, and they can't allow students to go to class because a small subset of those students and outside agitators want to shut down the camp. Where are the adults?
Morning Joe has been on MSNBC for nearly 2 decades, hosted by former Republican Congressman Joe Scarborough and co-host Mika Brzezinski. Now this show is popular. In 2016, they surpassed CNN for the first time ever, averaging 1 million concurrent viewers, likely due to the fact that Donald Trump, the Republican candidate, would often call into the show to disagree with Joe Scarborough.
You should be afraid of the other side, not my side. I want to get our hands around a very difficult situation.
All right, Donald.
Hey, Joe,
Donald, you got to let us ask questions. You can't just talk. No, you got to let us actually ask questions. You're just talking. All Muslims. Donald, you're not going to keep talking. We will go to break if you keep talking. We're going to ask you questions. All right, go to break. Go to break, everybody. Go to break. Go to break.
In 2023, Morning Joe was ranked the #1 cable morning show in both New York City and Washington, D.C. And Joseph Robinette Biden himself has gone on record stating Morning Joe as his favorite TV show, reportedly watching it every day and regularly calling the host of the show to hear his takes on different topics. This is seemingly a liberal television show, being predominantly watched by liberals in blue cities like DC and New York City, all packaged in what seems to be a liberal news network. Let's take a look at an interview from Morning Joe, an interview with Hillary Robinette Clinton herself. And tell me, does this feel like two liberals are having a discussion? Or does it feel like these talking points are the exact same things you'd hear on Fox News?
I want everybody to know what I'm about to talk to you about happened before October 7th. I'm going to talk about radicalism on college campuses. Sort of radicalism that has mainstream students getting propaganda, whether it's from their professors or whether it's from communist Chinese government through TikTok.
Anti-Chinese rhetoric is incredibly bipartisan, and the talking point that China is propagandizing the youth through TikTok is spread by Democrats and Republicans alike.
Of what nation are you a citizen?
Singapore.
Are you a citizen of any other nation?
No, Senator.
Have you ever applied for Chinese citizenship?
Senator, I served my nation in Singapore. No, I did not.
Do you have a Singaporean passport?
Yes, and I served my military for two and a half years in Singapore.
Do you have any other passports from any other nations?
No, Senator.
Your wife is an American citizen. Your children are American citizens.
That's correct.
Have you ever applied for American citizenship?
No, not yet.
Okay. Have you ever been a member of the Chinese Communist Party?
Senator, I'm Singaporean. No.
Have you ever been associated or affiliated with the Chinese Communist Party?
No, Senator. Again, I'm Singaporean.
Let me ask you some hopefully simple questions. You said earlier, in response to a question, that what happened at Tiananmen Square in June of 1989 was a massive protest. Did anything else happen in Tiananmen Square?
Yes, I think it's well documented. There was a massacre.
There was the indiscriminate slaughter of hundreds or thousands of Chinese citizens.
Incredibly hypocritical when American companies like Facebook have existed for decades now.
Calling the President of the United States Genocide Joe.
Joe Biden has been the greatest supporter and funder of Israel, even all the way back in 1986.
If we look at the Middle East, I think it's about time we stop, those of us who support, as most of us do, Israel in this body, for apologizing for our support for Israel. There's no apology to be made. None. It is the best $3 billion investment we make. Were there not an Israel, the United States of America would have to invent an Israel to protect her interest in the region.
And since Israel's founding, experts on genocide have come to the conclusion that there are reasonable grounds to believe Israel is committing genocide against the Palestinian people, something Biden continues to support to this day.
My commitment to the safety of the Jewish people, the security of Israel, and its right to exist as an independent Jewish state is ironclad, even when we disagree.
Calling you and President Clinton war criminals.
In 2002, as a senator, Hillary Clinton voted in favor of the invasion of Iraq. During her time in Obama's cabinet as Secretary of State, she oversaw the occupation of both Afghanistan and Syria, as well as the assassination of Omar Gaddafi and bombing of Libya, which eventually collapsed the economy of Libya, the once richest country in Africa. She also supported the 2009 coup in Honduras, which the UN condemned. She's even bragged about Henry Kissinger, a notorious war criminal, praising her for her work for the State Department.
Where the Secretary and I have a very profound difference. In the last debate, and I believe in her book, very good book, by the way, in her book and in this last debate, she talked about getting the approval or the support or the mentoring of Henry Kissinger. Now, I find it rather amazing because I happen to believe that Henry Kissinger was one of the most destructive secretaries of state in the modern history of this country. I am proud to say that Henry Kissinger is not my friend. I will not take advice from Henry Kissinger. And in fact, Kissinger's actions in Cambodia, when the United States bombed that country, overthrew Prince Sihanouk, created the instability for Pol Pot and the Khmer Rouge to come in, who then butchered some 3 million innocent people, one of the worst genocides in the history of the world. So count me in as somebody who will not be listening to Henry Kissinger.
Stopping the naming of a building after Madeleine Albright because they claim, professors claim, some of the same professors that took part in the most radical elements of the protests over the past couple of weeks, called Madeleine Albright a war criminal. And we're still waiting for the building for Foreign Service to be renamed after Madeleine Albright.
Madeleine Albright is also a notorious war criminal who supported the killing of over 500,000 children in Iraq because it was a worthy cost of doing business.
We have heard that 500,000 children have died. I mean, that's more children than died in Hiroshima. And you know, is the price worth it?
I think this is a very hard choice, but we think the price is worth it.
Here with first Secretary of State, that's a woman, made history, just like you made history.
They definitely made history, that's for sure.
But you've got mainstream college students, I know, because I've talked to a lot of college students over the past year or two.
That's a bit sus.
They have this radicalized view of the Middle East, a radicalized view of American public servants like yourself, Madeleine Albright, President Clinton, Joe Biden.
That radical view being, these are humans, leave them alone. We cause much more harm than good. Get out of the Middle East. Wow, so radical.
And there's this radicalization, and I just want to know, first of all, it's distressing. What do we do about it so public servants aren't taught that American leaders are war criminals and that Joe Biden's not Genocide Joe, quite the opposite? And secondly, the stupidity of the slogans that ignore all the history since 1948 about what the United States has tried to do, about what you tried to do, about what President Clinton tried to do in bringing a two-state solution about. I remember when you talked about a two-state solution and it was considered
radical. They couldn't believe, oh my God, Hillary Clinton actually is talking about a two-state solution.
In a leaked video from 2006, Hillary Clinton proposed rigging the Palestinian election. She may have called for a two-state solution, but she definitely didn't want Palestinian autonomy, entirely contradicting what a two-state solution would do.
And I want you to tell us what needs to be done, what you would hope would be done, one. Number two, how do we get Madeleine Albright's name on that building? Because she's been slandered in death. She's been slandered in death. A public servant who escaped the Holocaust, gave her entire life to the United States of America, and has been slandered in death by extremists, I'm sorry, funded by Qatar. And number three, I told you we were moving past therapy session. And number three, maybe this will get on YouTube if the communist Chinese will allow it to get on YouTube.
China has full control over the American internet. Qatar is controlling the minds of our youth. North Korea is making my son gay. Cuba is hitting my daughter with a trans laser.
Wow, I don't know where to start, Joe, but you
go ahead.
Yeah, okay.
I need help.
Well, I want to make a couple of quick points because you raised, things that need to be vented about. First of all, I have had many conversations, as you have had, with a lot of young people over the last many months now. And you're right, they don't know very much at all about the history of the Middle East, or frankly about history in many areas of the world, including in our own country.
Yes, blame our poor education, where we're given a watered-down explanation of history with just enough puzzle pieces to create some semblance of a complete story. But that's not the case this time. Universities are respected educational institutions teaching things like genocide studies. Yet the USC valedictorian who minored in genocide studies wasn't allowed to give a speech, which is usual for such an award, because of her outspoken support for Palestine.
They don't know that under the bringing together of the Israelis and the Palestinians by my husband, the then Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak, the then head of the Palestinian Liberation Organization, then the Palestinian Authority, Yasser Arafat. An offer was made to the Palestinians for a state on 96% of the existing territory occupied by the Palestinians, with 4% of Israel to be given to reach 100% of the amount of territory that was hoped for. And this offer was made, and if Yasser Arafat had accepted it, there would have been a Palestinian state now for about 24 years. It's one of the great tragedies of history that he was unable to say yes. My husband has a book coming out later this year, Joe, in which he talks about how Arafat kept saying he intended to agree, he wanted to agree, but he was, as you rightly point out, pretty sure he'd be killed.
Yeah, just blame the Palestinians. Was this not the leading progressive figure for liberals in 2015? I was young at the time, but people were riding hard for this woman. What a disgusting human being. The reason the Camp David Accords were unsuccessful is because the deal sucked.
Before the entire West Bank was scheduled to go under Palestinian control, the region was divided into these three areas: A, B, and C. Area A, according to the agreement, was meant to be under full Palestinian control. It initially comprised 3% of the region and grew to 18% by 1999. Area B is where Palestine would have civil control and Israel and Palestine would have joint security control. It consisted of around 25% of the region. In 2011, it went down to 21%. Area C would be under full Israeli control except for its Palestinian civilians, and form up to 74% of the territory. Palestinians criticized the PLO for agreeing to give Israel access to over 71% of the aquifer's water in the West Bank, while Palestinians were granted only 17%. Some also claimed that the agreement curtailed Palestinian economic capacity because it kept Israel in control of the land, water, and borders.
A two-state solution is no solution. It's simply enforcing permanence to an already illegal colonial project. Imagine if people invaded your country and then said, "I have a great deal for you. We stay and take half your land. If you don't agree to this, you're the idiot.
So this is a very important piece of history to understand if you're going to take any kind of position with respect to what's going on right now. And there's much more that we could go into, as you say, since 1948, but I mean, you could literally go back thousands of years.
This is the most brain-dead talking point I've heard in the past 8 months. Thousands of years ago, none of the religions even existed. They used this talking point to argue that it's a complex religious issue. Yet these religions didn't even exist thousands of years ago. Nothing about this is religious. The Israeli Zionists don't even claim to be doing a religious project.
The important point I want to emphasize, though, is propaganda is not education. Propaganda, on whether it's TikTok or in the classroom, is actually the opposite of education. Anybody who is teaching in a university or anyone who is putting content on social media should be held responsible for what they include and what they exclude.
Is this not literally what Fox News has talked about endlessly? Gay propaganda. But propaganda nonetheless, in classrooms indoctrinating our children? This is just the Democratic Party's version of that. Propaganda in classrooms indoctrinating kids to be against war. Wow. The horror.
And so much of what we're seeing, particularly on TikTok, about what's going on in the Middle East is woefully false, but it's also incredibly slanted, pro-Hamas, anti-Israel. And it is, not any place where anyone should go to get information about complex matters like what is going on there.
And that's why they're banning TikTok.
justified is shockingly and terrifyingly high. And so we really have a TikTok problem, a Gen Z problem, that our community needs to put the same brains that gave us Taglit, the same brains that gave us all these other amazing innovations, need to put our energy toward this, like, fast. Because again, like, we've been chasing this left-right divide. It's the wrong game.
By the way, it's pretty easy to be anti-Israel. You don't even have to try. The proof just falls into your lap. Any normal person should be anti-Israel.
We have to do a much better job in trying to, number one, teach history at all levels. That's why I love SUFs, because it's about our history. It's a part of history we didn't all study and learn about.
How come these people literally tell us to learn history? Yet they are the ones who don't understand it. Oh wait. It's 'cause they do know the history. It just doesn't fit their narrative. Remember, you can't be this evil and not know what you're doing. These rich politicians are very class conscious, which is how they know how to suppress that of the working class.
But it's also important that we recognize the propaganda value of social media. You know, people are on social media oftentimes to press an agenda, an ideological, a religious, a financial, a political, a partisan agenda. And so, of course, you don't get the facts. Of course, you don't get any kind of context. And we have to do a better job ourselves, and we certainly have to do a better job with young people in trying to help them understand how to filter and interpret the information they're giving. And I think we also need to do a better job in our classrooms, particularly at the college and university level, not to fall into, easy absolutes. You're either this or you're that. You're for, you're against. Life is too complicated. History certainly is.
Sorry, guys. You can't have an opinion anymore. You can't like tangerines. You have to just sorta like them.
Do you think New York State should recognize gay marriage?
No.
No. Okay.
Uh-oh, Hillary. You can't fall into easy absolutes. Life is too complicated, Hillary.
With respect to my dear friend, Madeleine Albright, she deserves to have anything and everything named for her.
Yes.
She lived the 20th century. She fled first from the Nazis, and then after returning to what was Czechoslovakia with her family, she had to flee the Soviet communists.
Just as the Association of College and Research Libraries said, promoting a false equivalency between left and right.
She exemplifies what freedom means. She demonstrates what a great refuge America has been for people seeking freedom.
Did you not just mention fleeing Nazi Germany? America famously denied thousands of Jews entry into the United States, with FDR claiming Jewish immigrants could threaten national security, saying they were Nazi spies. Ah yes, blame it on military strategy, and not the ever-powerful presence of anti-Semitism in America at the time. Don't worry, FDR, you already had Nazis on American soil.
Heaven forbid, if we don't protect this democracy, this Constitution, our values, our institutions against false narratives, against demagogic wannabe authoritarian leaders, shame on us. But let's not forget people who helped us get to where we are and where I hope we will always be. Here in this country. And Madeleine Albright was certainly one of those whom I admire greatly.
We need to take a stand and make an end once and for all to these lies that are being taught at universities. And once again, here's a complete and utter lie about Madeleine Albright. Love that woman. What happened to liberal media? What happened to liberals altogether? This woman was the leading progressive candidate in 2015. How is that even possible? If I was blindfolded, I 100% would have thought I was listening to a Fox News broadcast. Has left-wing media really moved that far right in only the past few years? Because I don't remember any liberal networks talking fondly of Trump, yet now they sound an awful lot like the people talking fondly of Trump. I'm young, meaning I haven't been on this earth for very long. So I had to take a look at some old footage to get the full picture. What I found is that TV news coverage was never really left-wing. Liberal for sure, but never left-wing. In the 2000s, they dogged on Bush just like they do now with Trump. Yet when it came to fundamental American capitalist strategy, they were all on board. The invasion of Iraq. Okay, maybe we shouldn't be killing so many civilians, but what needs to happen is Saddam needs to surrender.
Joined now by William Ury. He's the director of Harvard University's Project on Preventing War and is considered one of the world's leading negotiators. Professor, thanks so much for joining us. Donald Rumsfeld says there's nothing left to negotiate with Saddam Hussein. He had his chance, he blew it, and now it's all over for him. I know you disagree on that front.
Well, I really do think there's an enormous negotiating opportunity here. No one knows what can happen, but the opportunity is to save perhaps tens of thousands of lives, civilians, military, Americans, British, Iraqi, through a negotiated surrender. What would it take? It would take a pause perhaps in the attack. It would take a mediator, perhaps the Russians could do the job, or perhaps the Vatican. And it would take some kind of deal where there's some kind of surrender of the Iraqi forces. There's perhaps some kind of amnesty offered, perhaps some kind of safe passage out of the country. Now that would be a bitter pill to swallow to have Saddam Hussein leave, but would it be worth saving tens of thousands of lives and sparing Baghdad? Might be.
A bunch of crazy college students protesting with tents? They don't know what they're talking about.
Now for a story that made us say, seriously? The Occupy Wall Street protest entered its third week today. What started as less than a dozen college students camping out in a park near the New York Stock Exchange is now hundreds of protesters, and it's spread to other cities. But what are they protesting? Nobody seems to know. So this afternoon, we went to Wall Street to find out. And despite what you heard, here's what I saw. It's not just a bunch of dancing hippies protesting. There are all kinds of people there. Babies, teachers, cheerleaders, Uncle Sampta, and that. Seriously, it's a mixed bag, but they were happy to take some time from their books, banjos, bongos, sports drinks, catered lunch. Yeah, there was catered lunch. Designer yoga clothing. That's a Lululemon logo. Computers, lots of MacBooks, and phones to help us get to the bottom of it. This is unemployed software developer Dan. What do you do for a living?
I'm a software developer.
Software developer.
Yes.
So currently employed or unemployed?
Unemployed.
Unemployed.
Unemployed, we like to call it.
Unemployed.
It's called Occupy Wall Street.
So do you know that taxpayers actually made money on the Wall Street bailout?
I was not aware of that.
They did. They made, not on GM, but they did on the Wall Street part of the bailout.
Okay.
Does that make you feel any differently?
Well, I would have to do more research about it, but...
if I were right, it might.
Oh, sure.
Seriously? That's all it would take to put an end to the unrest. Well, as promised, we did go double-check the numbers on the bank bailout, and this is what we found. Yes, the bank bailouts made money for American taxpayers right now to the tune of $10 billion. Anticipated that it will be $20 billion. Those are seriously the numbers.
History may never repeat itself, but it always seems to rhyme. The true reality of media bias is a lot more evident when liberal media doesn't have Donald Trump in office to rip on 24/7. When your talking points are more or less the same, China bad, college students dumb, but you don't have Trump in office, so you can't say Orange Man bad, there really is nothing that sets liberal media apart from conservative, except for maybe an occasional support for progressive social issues. Jon Stewart even made fun of liberal media for making such a spectacle of Trump's court case.
This trial will obviously be a test of the fairness of the American legal system, but it's also a test of the media's ability to cover Donald Trump in a responsible way, a task they have acknowledged they've performed poorly in the past.
I think to the degree that the media had lessons learned in 2016, they seem to have been learned.
It's irresponsible for cable news networks to give Donald Trump hours and hours of free airtime.
Way too much speculation and liberal wishful thinking and attempts to connect dots that did not connect.
It's the media's responsibility to not get distracted.
I think we were much too busy chasing after shiny objects.
All of us have learned some very valuable lessons from the last couple of years.
Here we go. It's on. It's happening. History will be made.
Shaping up to be the trial of the century.
Maybe the trial of the century.
The trial of the century.
But just might be the trial of the century.
The tax man is here, Donald Trump.
He will finally be forced to face the music.
The legal walls closing in around Donald Trump.
The legal walls are starting to close in on Donald Trump.
You're looking at live pictures in New York City of Donald Trump's motorcade.
It's about a 20-minute drive between Trump Tower and the court building.
Trump leaving Trump Tower on 5th Avenue.
They're now making their way across town along 57th Street. They just crossed Park Avenue, making their way up towards Lexington Avenue.
He's heading down the FDR
to the Manhattan Courthouse on Chambers Street.
Arriving at this intersection of American history with defiance.
Arriving at the intersection of American history with defiance, the brilliant juxtaposing of the gravitas of the moment with simple traffic terms was...
At the end of the day, TV media bias is a lie. Left-wing media may be in support of progressive issues, but at the end of the day, they play a major role in the continuation of capitalism and its protection abroad, as well as the suppression of its opposition here in America. I do have to hand it to one person though, MSNBC talking head Chris Hayes. I don't know much about this guy, but his reporting on the Gaza solidarity encampments at US universities was actually very well done, and didn't put down their cause or lie about what was taking place.
In the spring of 1969, a group of students at Morehouse College, historically black college in Atlanta, were frustrated by what they said was the school's slow progress on civil rights. And they'd protested, they'd been rebuffed. So they locked the college trustees in their office for 2 days and essentially held them hostage. Now, one of the trustees was Martin Luther King Sr., father of the recently slain civil rights leader. He began having chest pains, and one of the students later said, "We let him out of there so he wouldn't be accused of murder." That student and his classmates eventually gave up under a promise of amnesty from the college. The college reneged, and he was expelled. It would be years before he was rehabilitated, and decades before he became known the world over as actor Samuel L. Jackson. Now, I tell this story for two reasons. One, to remind us that college activism has long been a part of college education. The other reason, though, is to get a sense of proportion, which seems lacking today. The way that so many prominent voices have focused so exclusively on colleges feels honestly a bit decadent to me. like we're doing a paper doll version of the conflict, because the actual reality of what's happening in Gaza is so horrific, unceasing, and high stakes. It's more enjoyable to argue about what college kids are doing than to confront the human misery and destruction that's happening in the actual conflict. That is, of course, the source of these protests. What seems most worth debating isn't campus speech, but whether the U.S. government should continue to fund and support an Israeli war in Gaza that has pushed more than 1 million people to the brink of famine, a war that has damaged half of the buildings in Gaza, a war that has failed to bring home most of the hostages held by Hamas, that has fact and led to the death of some of those hostages.
So what about less traditional media, like podcasting? I tend to stay away from the big names in news podcasting that are colloquially understood in America as left-wing, those being The Daily from New York Times and Up First from NPR. Now, I am biased as a socialist. I take in media knowing it's meant to cause some specific emotion in me, and especially when it's liberal media, which you can never really trust fully. Recently, I've made an effort to listen to these podcasts, not so much to hear the latest news, as I've heard most of it already, but really to see how mainstream liberal media is framing these events that I've already heard about and understood. And let me just say, nearly every single time I listen to these two podcasts, I am full-on disgusted by the blatantly obvious journalistic malpractice. Like with the student encampments, for example, I could tell what they were trying to make me feel. They really emphasized the existence of anti-Semitism at these protests, when if you ask anyone there, many of whom are Jewish, nothing anti-Semitic was said.
You had students chanting from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, which for some of the protesters were meant as more generic statements of Palestinian freedom. But for many Jews, sound like calls for ethnic cleansing of Jews from Israel. You had chants, Intifada, Intifada, long live the Intifada, which is a word that means uprising, but which many people, especially people of a certain age, sounds like an endorsement of the violent tactics of the Second Intifada, suicide attacks.
For example, just 4 days after the harrowing October 7 attack, a former Columbia undergraduate beat an Israeli student with a stick.
The Republican chairwoman of the committee, Virginia Fox, starts reminding her that there was a student who was actually hit with a stick on campus. There was another gathering more recently glorifying Hamas and other terrorist organizations.
It's honestly scary what these podcasts are doing, because they package themselves as liberal, if not progressive media, yet the rhetoric they're pushing is just blatantly deceiving. I want to take a quick look at who owns our media and the connections they have with the government, because let me tell you, they are tight. Rupert Murdoch, a former advisor to Trump, is the owner of Fox News in the United States, as well as the rest of the Fox TV family, but he also owns Sky News in Australia, Germany, Italy, and the UK, and several of the newspapers and magazines around the world, like the New York Post.
A quarter of a century, 30 years after Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher left office, is this where they would have hoped the United States and Britain would be?
Not at all.
What's
I
gone
think
wrong?
they feel it's slid a lot.
What's gone wrong?
I was reading today of a woman with 2 children. She only makes $19,000 a year, but with food stamps, subsidies from state and federal government, welfare, she's getting the equivalent of $85,000. Now, that's why we're going broke.
When looking at local news, 60% of local media coverage is owned by Sinclair Broadcast Group, who also has close ties to Trump. Sinclair Broadcast Group has been known to sneak in right-wing talking points into local news coverage and overall spread right-wing fear-mongering. The New Yorker reported Sinclair employees say that the company orders them to air biased political segments produced by the corporate news division, including editorials by the conservative commentator Mark Hyman, and that it feeds interviewers questions intended to favor Republicans. Ever notice how local news is all just sad, depressing, scary stories? Robberies, natural disasters, crime, tragedy. It's all meant to radicalize the viewers into a more conservative mindset. Me versus the world. I cannot and will not leave my house without being incredibly cautious and seeing my neighbor as an other.
Neighbors living next to a Twin Cities homeless encampment are sharing
sharing their concerns.
That camp is just steps from busy Lake Street in South Minneapolis, and many of the neighbors told us they live in fear every day.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Esme Murphy. We are following tragic breaking news right now in Burnsville, where 2 police officers and 1 paramedic are dead after a domestic call.
Out of nowhere, they said, "Give us your keys, we'll kill you."
We've heard your stories and cries for help.
You're not safe in broad daylight.
Jennifer Mayerly investigates who's responsible for the carjacking crisis.
So, TV news broadcasts are obviously incredibly biased, and each channel tends to have a lot more similarities in their coverage than differences. But media has been changing a whole lot since the early 2000s. You don't even need to own a TV anymore to get your news. Most people have smartphones or a library nearby with a computer. Most of the news today takes place online. Even late night shows and primetime news coverage uploads much of their TV output onto YouTube completely free. It's no longer left and right traditional media institutions. You have to go a step further. As Jon Stewart said, it's between corruption and integrity.
But Jon, you do have a unique ability to call out both sides when you see that they may be fluid with the truth, is how I'll phrase
and a
it.
unique allergy to the idea of both sides. I mean, you want to call out the truth.
I think it's a question of, what are the axes that we're working off of? I think generally you like to work off of the difference between corruption and integrity as opposed to right and left or Democrat and Republican. And if you focus on integrity and try and expose what you think is absurd or corrupt, it'll find its way to wherever it finds, but those are the parameters that you're trying to use.
And that divide is incredibly visible when you know what to look for in online media. Popular YouTube news broadcasts like Democracy Now! And The Majority Report are for the most part funded by the viewers, or at the very least, small sponsorships from small businesses. Not these big corporate backers like the Koch brothers, who throw their seed money towards much more right-wing news broadcasts like the Daily Wire and Louder with Crowder, which seems to be on the decline.
That doesn't work either.
These right-wing seed money providers see the turn from TV to online media and are trying to counteract that. But it's not so easy. When there are such easy outlets for left-wing media to flourish without being shot down by their capitalist supporting funders, they're allowed to be truly left-wing, which is often realized when there is a clear critique of US foreign policy. Now, I glaze this man a whole lot, but allow me to do it again. I truly think the last bastion of truly left-wing media on TV, obviously not far left, but much further left than any other show, is The Daily Show, especially since Jon Stewart's return. He really is not afraid to say what's on his mind about the American State Department. Over the past couple months, the show has done an amazing job poking and prodding at the underlying issues with our system and the way our media covers said system, all the while being funded by Paramount Global, the same people that own CBS, who airs much of the local news channels that Sinclair Broadcast Group owns after signing a new deal in late 2023. He's quite literally taking down the system from the inside in broad daylight, folks. In the end, the media hasn't really changed. CNN, MSNBC, they haven't gone further to the right. It only seems that way because the only divide between the left and right was visible under Trump. The real change in the media landscape is the opportunities online, which have allowed truly left-wing media to exist, which has contributed to the further growth and strengthening of the American left. Hassan Piker on Twitch, The Reason I'm a Socialist Today, as well as Majority Report on YouTube, streaming throughout the day, covering the news, and interviewing experts. Institutions like Democracy Now! And Breakthrough News with their show The Socialist Program, which have allowed me to further understand geopolitical events from a socialist perspective, a dialectical analysis. These growing left-wing movements are growing online, and no one can really stop them. Even while putting millions of dollars into right-wing online media, the space has so much opportunity it can't be slowed down. It's a tale as old as time. The same thing happened all the way back with the printing press. It allowed Protestants to further spread religious revolutionary doctrine to the masses, and it couldn't really be combated. More accessible media creation allows for more widespread media consumption, allowing for fringe movements to grow. So while fascist sentiment may be moving to the forefront at the same time, so is socialist sentiment, further filling the media space with real constructive solutions to the confusing, seemingly solutionless world causing folks to turn to fascism. People-funded, people-supported media is the media that will change the world. Left-wing media is not dead. You simply have to know where to find it. And finding said media is becoming ever more effortless.
Do you still support banning TikTok? Would you sign that bill? If they pass it, I'll sign it.
Now, the US Senate has overwhelmingly passed a bill ordering TikTok's Chinese owners to sell the app within months or see it banned in the United States.
Thank you for watching North Star Radio. Peace and love, and free Palestine.